Welcome, everybody. This is going to be a little bit of a different presentation tonight because um, uh, uh, the three of us are going to sort of all chime in at once. We've got a lot of we've got three different viewpoints here. And just in some conversations we've had among the three of us, we've got lots of things to say. So it's not really rehearsed, and we're going to just play it by ear. We have a few slides to help guide us. And let's start with this one, which are, what are your options? I want to say, give you an idea of what Laura regards as her perfect phone call. Now, Laura, as Ron said, is the honcho of the prints and maps and other things at the famous Argosy bookstore in New York. And her perfect phone call is when somebody calls up and says, you know, Grandpa died a couple of years ago and he had a whole bunch of stuff and we didn't know what to do with it. So we put it in boxes and stored it in the basement. And we were about to throw it out, but we saw a bunch of old maps and prints and things in there. Would you like to come and look at it? Laura, am I right? Is that a perfect call?
It is true because it's what we find is a lot of people are overwhelmed with material. They don't know what they have. They don't know what it is. And the person who knew about it, the collector, has passed away. So I don't want to sound like a creepy dealer or anything like that, but it is, we provide cold hard cash quickly to those who want to sell. And in a way, it's probably the lowest common denominator. It's kind of, maybe the highest way to deal with the items would be to donate them to an institution. The middle ground would be to auction, and then the last resort would be to sell to a dealer. Not to put down dealers, but it's just one method of selling. And a lot of people end up doing that because they don't know what else to do.
So we're going to talk about all these things here, but before we do that, we want to spend a few minutes on getting organized. And all three of us have very strong views about this. The first one is that it's absolutely essential if you want to do anything other than have your grandchildren deal with a dumpster. It's essential that you have some sort of a simple digital catalog. If you want to deal with an institution, if you want to go to a dealer, if you want to talk to an auction house, they're going to want to see your digital catalog. Laura, Eliane, you want to comment on that?
Sure, I will. I think that the important thing and what we have up on this slide here is the type of information that you want to have within your list. Ideally, the best format is to have it in Excel because that's the most readily usable by any organization. It can be in a Word document, but this is definitely not preferable because it is harder to sift through information when it's in a Word document. So the key components that you really need to have are the author, the creator, the title of the item, the date that it was published, or the approximate date that that it pertains to, the size of it, and that's because there are some maps that have the exact same title and author and date, but might be a small version and a large version. And then for tax and inheritance purposes, you really should have records of where you purchased it and the amount for which you purchased it, because that will help as you are getting into looking to sell something. That if you have that information, that will give you at least a leg up on what your items are worth for both yourself and your heirs to know that information. Now, other notes that are great to have, but are not necessarily required, if you have information about the condition or a description of the item, or let's see, yeah, so some other details that you have on the item, that's also helpful. But these, 6 pieces of information are really necessary for any list that you might create.
Let me just say a word about software here. If you go online and you look for cataloging software for books or maps or collectibles, there are what has to be thousands of different kinds of software available. You don't have to use an Excel spreadsheet, but you really should use something that will export an Excel file. Almost all of the libraries and institutions and dealers and auction houses will be able to import an Excel file into whatever their software is because they have their own software. So Excel is kind of a Rosetta Stone. So a lot of people I know use something called FileMaker Pro, which is supposed to be quite good. I use Excel, but there are other things that are good, but it needs to be something that can be useful. Every institutional librarian or dealer or auction person will have a story about somebody who has a great collection of 1,200 pieces. And they certainly do have a catalog, and it's on floppy disks, which will run very well on a Tandy Radio Shack TRS-80 if you happen to have one around. That's not going to work. So that's an important thing to pay attention to.
PJ, I can hear you well, but there was one comment in the chat that someone was having trouble. So just try to be close to your microphone when you speak.
I will. The other thing I was going to add has to do with the final note on the slide, and that is write a simple roadmap for your executor. Where is the stuff? How is it organized? Where's your catalog? How can they get access to it? It's not hard to do, but that will make it much easier. As to the notes field, anything can go in there. You can talk about the condition of the map. If you've done some research on the map, you can write your research notes there. In my case, as Ron said, my collection is online. I have extensive research notes on everything. But the most important thing is what Elian said. You've got to have name, rank, and serial number because you have to have the basics if you want to be able to deal with anybody.
One comment I'd like to make, PJ, under this list is it's kind of intimidating for people to make such a detailed list. If they don't have time, one of the things they can do at the very least with their family is come up with a cipher. That's what I do in my family. I have, on the things I've purchased, we have a code that all of our family members know. And so on the item, I have in a code what I paid for it. And that's something that is pretty easy to do if you're too busy to make a list. At the very least, something that doesn't look valuable, you can at least see what your loved one paid for it. And that could be really helpful too.
Okay, so let's move on to the next subject, which I'm going to start off on this because this is something I have done. And that is selling or giving your collection to an institution. I want to start with the point of who's paying whom. A lot of collectors have extremely valuable collections. They're extraordinary collections. They are expensive. They're beautiful. And they believe that they will be able to sell them to an institution. That's not likely. If you have the previously unknown second copy of the Waldseemüller map, you will be able to sell it to an institution. But institutional budgets are extremely tight. Institutions have a great deal of material already. And it's not easy. It's really not easy to find a situation in which an institution will pay for your collection. Indeed, in many cases, the institution will ask you to give them the collection and money. I looked up recently just to get a rough idea. Institutions these days say that to catalog a book the cost of cataloging a book is somewhere between $10 and $30 a book. And maps are, if anything, more difficult to catalog. So when an institution takes your collection, and those are just the marginal costs, when an institution takes your collection, they are undergoing a financial burden, and the donor needs to be aware of that. Just a word about institutional bureaucracy. When you deal with dealers or auction houses, they are providing you a service, and they're in the business of being accommodating to you as much as they can. Institutions have different priorities. There are institutional imperatives that, in almost every case, go far beyond an individual collection or an individual collector. So that if you're dealing with an institution, and if you haven't before, you may find that from time to time, things happen or don't happen in a way that don't seem to make sense to you. That's just a part of what you need to be prepared for. When you're dealing with an institution, what should you ask for? I'm aware of one story where a gentleman has a terrific collection, still has a terrific collection of thousands of items in a very interesting area, which institutions would love to have. But his insistence is that every item in his collection be on display at all times. Not surprisingly, he has not found an institution that is willing to deal with him on that basis. So you may have things that are important to you. In my case, what was important was having a supporting website, and basically that was the critical thing that I asked for. I pretty much asked for nothing else. But for some people, it's teaching, how it'll be used for teaching, who will curate it. You need to think about what it is you want the most. And on appraisal, I think my colleagues here probably have more to say than I. The tax appraisal is its own unique and fun proposition. It's time consuming. It's time to time frustrating. But if you're going to donate to an institution, you're going to need to do it. And it does take some planning, and it does take providing a lot of information.
Now, PJ, can I interrupt now?
Yeah, please.
How hard was it for you to find someone to appraise your collection?
Well, I found different people at different times
Mhm.
to appraise my collection. Basically, I asked around. I asked a lot of dealers. I asked everybody I knew, and came up with several solutions. And if anybody wants a personal recommendation, I'll be glad to give it to them. You need to have somebody who's got the right certificates. There's appraisal standards and qualifications that the IRS needs, or at least desperately wants. There are a lot of rules that you need to follow and you need to think about. For example, the appraiser cannot appraise anything that is less in which you purchased less than a year ago for anything more than you paid for it. So if you bought a wonderful Gastaldi on eBay for $100, you better wait a year and a day before you decide to give it to anybody. Anyway,
one other thing that I would just mention. So my father, before he passed away, he actually worked with his alma mater to donate a portion of his collection to them. And he had worked this out many, many, many years ago. And I think the important thing to note is if you do find an institution that will accept your collection, have an understanding of what they intend to do with that collection. and whether or not they have the resources to properly care for it and maintain it over the years. And that was part of what PJ was talking about, is the costs, and sometimes they'll ask you to pay in order to take your donation, because it will cost them money to maintain it. But you also want to understand, if it matters to you, will they plan on just selling the collection and then using the funds for other things? Or will they actually keep the collection and house it? Will they display it? What will they do with it? So just have an understanding of what their intent is, and can they actually maintain that going forward?
That's great. Okay. Laura, anything else on this subject?
Well, I think the one thing is that the appraisal can be quite expensive, and it can also be hard to find someone to appraise your collection. It's dealers don't want to do it because once they appraise it, they can't buy it. They can't, once they put a value on it, they're not able to purchase what they're looking at, and it's very time consuming. So typically dealers will only do appraisals when the collection's really interesting or unique, or there's a lot, or they're going to get a lot of money for it. So I think that it's a surprise to find out how expensive it can be to get your collection appraised.
Good point.
Mhm.
So let's move on here to the next subject, which is, if I can click in the right place, selling to a dealer. Laura?
Yes, finding the right dealer, and the, like I said before, the highlight, the best part about selling to a dealer is that you don't need the lists, you don't need provenance, you don't need receipts, you don't need anything. You just bring the items, or the dealer picks it up. So it's the fastest, easiest way to disseminate your collection. But the downside, which I'm sure you all probably aware of, you can likely get less money for the artwork than if it was to go to auction. So a lot of people feel that they don't want to sell to a dealer because the dealer might be too shrewd or trying to rip them off, or not going to give them a fair price. But the dealer is very flexible. The dealer can go anywhere, anytime, any place, and pick it all up quickly. They're not picky, they're not discerning, they will take it all. And that's the real advantage to selling to a dealer, in my opinion. But you know, it's a question of organization. Like if you, typically people are and have a deadline, they're moving, they have to, they don't know what to do with the items, they have to get rid of it, so they want the cash and they want to do it quickly. The right dealer, PJ, I don't know, can you elaborate on who's the right dealer?
I don't know.
Would that mean who pays the most or who's the nicest? I don't know. Can you elaborate on who's the right dealer?
I don't know. I mean, it's yeah, who will pay the most? Talk about selling outright to a dealer versus consignment. Will you take things on consignment?
We don't do consignment at Argosy because we have too much material, but there are many dealers who are more boutique, smaller. They may not have a store. They're virtual. They do fairs. They will do consignment. And the advantage to that is you can set your own price. You can say, well, you know, I really want to make this for it. And you work closely with the dealer to try to get that price. It's better for special items or items that are more expensive. Like you wouldn't, you know, probably consign $1,000 item because there's no point in it. But it's something dealers do, a lot of dealers do it, and it's a wait game. You have to wait for it to sell, whereas an auction in that case would be quicker.
Leon, anything to add?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'll say a word about consignment. I have a different collection, not maps, that I've had a bunch of stuff and consigned them to a dealer. And it was an interesting process.
Why did you consign them versus selling them outright?
Well, because they were, I had a collection of books in a certain area, and the most valuable of those I put up at auction. But then I had a bunch that were sort of a middle value. They were not, hugely valuable, but they weren't kind of things that you'd be happy to donate to a thrift store. So dealer took a whole bunch of them, and I'm still in the process on consignment. But your point about waiting is a good point. The prices I've gotten have been quite good, but it's been, I would say, I think it's been 2.5 years,
Oh, wow. Okay.
and I've sold about maybe 20% of the stuff. But the prices are good. And as you said before, the beauty of that is the dealer took everything. That was it. I mean, I had a bunch of things, put them in boxes, and off it went. So it's that, but it is a waiting game. It's a waiting. All right, let's talk about auctions. Let's talk about auctions.
All
Amelia,
right, sure. So when you're dealing with selling at an auction, the first thing you want to understand is what the fees are going to be and if there are any potentially hidden fees. So most auction houses will charge a seller's commission on the value at which an item will sell. So it's usually a percentage of the sales price. But some auction houses will charge additional fees for things like photography or marketing, storage, cataloging, insurance, return fees, and the like. So you just make sure that when you're working with an auction house, you understand what all the potential fees are involved. The timing, like Laura mentioned, is going to take longer than selling to a dealer, but probably would take less time than consigning with a dealer. So when you're consigning at auction, most auction houses will want the material 1 to 3 months before the upcoming auction so that they have time to properly evaluate everything, scan it, photograph it, catalog it, and so on. Now, depending on how many items you're consigning and depending on what type of material you have, will determine how many auctions it might take to sell through all of your material. So for instance, if you have a collection that is very geographically narrow, so a very narrowly focused collection, that's going to take an auction house longer to sell through because they don't want to flood the market with 100 maps of Panama all at once because they're not going to sell and you're not going to realize good prices. So if you have a very narrowly focused collection, it's going to take longer to sell through them at auction. If it's very diverse, you can probably sell through those in a much faster period of time. The other thing you need to take account of is with different auction houses, they're going to have a different sell-through rate, which is simply the number of items that the percentage of items that they sell each auction. So if they're selling a high percentage of the items each auction, you're going to be able to sell your material very quickly than if they don't. In terms of the process, typically, like we said before, you're going to send a list to the auction house, ideally photos of the items so that they can properly evaluate them and determine which ones they can accept. You're then going to want to confirm the fees, the timing, potentially the value of the items that they're estimating for you. And then you're going to need to get those items to the auction house. Most auction houses will require that you either deliver or ship your items to them so that they can evaluate them and catalog them and photograph them themselves. After you do that, you're going to sit back and wait. They'll do all the work, put it into auction, and you will receive a check after the auction. So that's the basic, simple process. And then in terms of a generalist auction house versus a map specialist, there are a lot of auction houses that we all know of that sell a myriad of different types of items, from antique furniture to prints and art and silverware and jewelry and maps and so on. Those types of auction houses are probably best for people who are trying to sell a number of different categories at once. It is a simple one-stop shop for you to be able to go and consign a bunch of different types of items. Typically you may achieve lower prices overall from a generalist auction house just because they may not specialize in that area. So they may not be drawing as many customers who are looking for maps specifically at that auction house. With a specialist auction house, you're probably going to achieve better, more consistent results over time. You can also offload a larger collection through an auction house that specializes in that category versus a generalist one, simply because, for instance, our auction house, we sell around 4,000 cartographic items a year. The next closest auction house, I think, in the world sells maybe 1,500 items a year. And most auction houses out there that do include maps within their auctions will sell a few hundred each year. So if you have a large collection, you're going to want to go to a specialist auction house. They're simply going to be able to be better prepared to handle your material and sell through it in a timely fashion.
Eliane, can you say something about the setting of reserves?
Sure. So most auction houses will have a reserve. The reserve is the price at which both the auction house and the seller have agreed that once the bidding hits that price, that it will sell. I don't know how other auction houses operate in terms of reserves. We set the reserves and we confirm them with the consignor. And if a consignor wants a reserve that is higher than we believe the market warrants at the time, we will not accept that item. We'll let the consignor know we can't sell this item for $1,000 because right now the market is saying it's only worth $700. So we simply won't accept that item. We'll return it to the consignor. But there is a back and forth, and there must be agreement between the auction house and the consignor as to what those reserves are for each item.
Yeah, I want to say just a word about auction fees. And Eliane, you don't have to react to this. The buyer's premium is not negotiable. Those are fixed fees, and maybe in some situations they are, but those are fixed. Seller's fees are subject to negotiation. If you're an auction house or if you're a dealer, you're in the business of trying to get as much material as you can. And so if you go to an auction house with material that is good material that they believe will sell easily, there is a lot of flexibility in the seller's fees. And my advice, I'm sorry, Eliane, but my advice is to negotiate those if you're going to an auction house. You don't have to comment, please.
No, I mean, I will say we definitely our sellers' fees are dependent on the value of the material. So for higher value material, that's going to warrant lower seller fees. And that's just kind of natural. So I would absolutely agree with you. And it depending on the auction house, it could be the value per item, or it could be the value of the entire consignment that can lead to reducing the seller fees. But that it certainly is something that can be negotiable.
Okay, Laura, comments on any of this?
One thing I wanted to you to elaborate on, Eliane, is if you put an item in an auction and it doesn't sell, would you be willing to re-auction it at a later date, like depending on the mood or the vibe, or is that something you wouldn't do?
So we actually do relist items that haven't sold in subsequent auctions, but we take a look at the items and it is a judgment call as to whether or not we think that there is a good chance that it will sell if it has a second chance. And we do find that in every auction, there are different people coming to the table. So you might try something in one auction and it gets no bids, and you try it in a different auction and suddenly you have 4 bidders vying for it. Mm-hmm. So it can depend on who simply is bidding that day, and that's why we will relist items. Mm-hmm. So yeah, for instance, we had an item that we listed in September, and it got one bid of 6,000, and that's it. And it didn't sell because it was below the reserve. We tried it again this February, and it ended up selling for 13,500. And there were 4 bidders bidding on it. So that just goes to show it just depends on who's there that day and how badly they want it. So that's why we will give things a second chance, especially since we've already put in the work, photographing it, cataloging it, and so on. And we find that with our consigners, we sell around 75 to 80% of the material in every auction. But for consigners for whom we are relisting their material that didn't sell, we typically get sell-throughs for those consigners around 90 to 95%. So it really does help sell additional material, and it's a good opportunity for them.
Well, it's good to know. I mean, I think one of the reasons that people may go to a dealer instead of an auction is the quietness of it. Like if you just don't want your objects out there digitally or the world to know, you can quietly sell things to a dealer and no one will ever know, you know. So that's one advantage to it. And I think the advantage to selling at auction, in my opinion, is the excitement. The potential. You just don't know what's going to happen. The thrill of it. And I don't know if you feel some clients get that. The thrill of not knowing if it's going to sell for the estimate or not. Is that part of it?
I don't know that that's part of it on the consignor side. It's definitely part of it on the buyer side. There's a lot of excitement. I think for most of our consigners, I think you find that some items will go for well over what you expected, and then some items will go for less than what you expected. And so hopefully you come out, you know, even on the end, and things at least come out, you know, approximately where you thought they would from a, you know, from a holistic perspective for one consignor, with a group of materials. So, you know, some will come out above, some will come out below, some will come out right where they expected, and hopefully it's a good opportunity for them to be able to sell their material. But yeah, I mean, we can accept consignments. I mean, we've accepted consignments of over 500 items in the past. And, you know, it can take a while to sell through all that material, but if it's material that's of a region that is popular, that we know will sell, we'll accept that type of material. But we definitely have to consider what is current in the market, what are people looking for, and trying to take the material that we believe we can sell on their behalf. We won't take material that we feel will not sell, whether it's due to condition or just lack of interest within the market. So should we go through some of the questions that are coming in over the chat?
Our goal here was to leave a good amount of time for questions, and I hope, Ron, you've been shepherding those.
Yes, I've been looking at them. There are quite a few. There might be a little repetition. But one thing I'd like to comment on, one of the things I like to do during our programs is watch the attendance numbers. And I think you'll probably all be pleased to know that the numbers have been 90, 91, 92, 93. I haven't really kept a good memory of past meetings, but I would say this is probably one of the highest attended meetings in the last several years. So in that sense, thanks, Laura. Thanks, PJ. Thanks, Elion. I think you have addressed a topic that is of major interest to the people in the map collecting field. So to start with the questions, Nick Canas, how do dealers determine the price to offer? Wholesale, percentage of estimated retail?
Well, it's a delicate subject, the price that is offered. But we tend to look at the highest retail price of the object, take 20% off that, and then divide it by 4 or 5. I know that sounds brutal to the audience, but it's the kind of thing that, you know, you're putting yourself out there by buying the object. You may sit on that object for 20 years. You don't know how long you're going to have it. So it's a big investment for a dealer. So there's no real formula. It depends on the object, but it can be as low as a quarter of the retail value.
David Keith asked, is Recollector a good way to store records? And then Stephen Nagler commented, Recollector allows one to export to Excel. So I guess, do any of you have any further comments on that medium?
I've never used it.
Okay.
I haven't either.
Okay, I guess we'll move on. J.C. McElveen, a digital catalog should also include the dates of the collector's purchase of the items.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Okay, Robert Garfinkel says at the Niles S&A Silent Film Museum, they use something called Catalog It, and they have over 1,700 films. Okay, Chris Butler. Has anyone used an app called Book Buddy? Mostly for books with maps, but also maps. Not sure if it exports to Excel.
If it doesn't export to Excel, I'd be very nervous.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. It captures so much information about books. But if it doesn't, I will investigate and let the three speakers know.
Mark Greaves, I would be interested in your thoughts on another option not listed in your initial slide. Selling your maps yourself on eBay at a map fair or wherever.
It's too time consuming.
Yeah, I would say selling on eBay, it's if you're retired and you have lots of time on your hands, then it can be a great option. The issues there are unless you have, well, it's harder if you don't have some sort of a reputation on eBay and a lot of good reviews that people may not trust what they're buying because eBay is filled with people who don't know what they're selling. So you have to establish a reputation on there, but it is very time consuming. And the fees on eBay are actually fairly high. I think they're around 20%, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not necessarily less expensive than going to an auction where they do all the work for you.
It might be okay if you have a large collection of relatively low cost items, and if you have the time to deal with it. But it doesn't sound attractive to me as a collector. I doesn't sing.
Okay, next question from Steve Fox. My collection is 90% plus reproductions that I've purchased online. Little monetary value beyond the aesthetics of the framing I've done for display. They are of places I've lived around the world, very idiosyncratic and many of limited interest. Suggestions?
Well, reproductions are very hard to resell because they don't really have any value, just decorative value. Even frames, like when people sell me maps that are in frames, I don't add on value for the framing unless I'm doing an appraisal and it's for insurance purposes. So meaning replacement value, because framing, as anyone knows who lives in New York, can be very expensive. So it's really only counted for monetarily for insurance purposes, not for selling. If they're all prints, you maybe donate them to Housing Works. That's the first thing I thought of.
Yeah, talk about framing. You, both of you, Eliane and Laura, had some comments on frames.
Yeah, I mean,
Housing Works?
we typically won't accept items that are in a frame. We require that our customers remove them from the frames, or we'll remove them from the frames in order to sell them, because frames both hide and cause more damage to paper than just about anything else we encounter. I would say probably 50% of the frames that I open up, there will be some hidden damage underneath that you can't necessarily see readily through the glass. So frames are something that we try to stay away from. If you have low value items that are framed, I would recommend selling them, trying to find an auction house who can accept them in a frame. So like a local generalist auction house that can sell decorative items that are in a frame, you'll get a better value for them because they're framed and ready to go and people can put them on their walls. If the map inside or the print inside doesn't have great value, you'll get a better return if you do it in the frame.
Agree.
Okay, Karen Pinto, FileMaker Pro is my go-to. It houses images beautifully with a detailed database of info. It can export to Excel. Problem with Excel is it doesn't house images alongside the detailed data.
I think that's right. That's right.
Okay. Okay, Tom Touchton.
Sorry,
Oh,
Tom,
go
I'm sorry,
ahead.
Ron. Just to go back to the Excel housing images, it can hold images. I have a Excel database and I store images in it. It's a question of simply cutting and pasting an image into a cell and then going into the properties and locking the picture in there to size with the cells as it goes on. So it's not the most advanced form of storage, and it's only good for thumbnails, I think. Well, I know it is, but you can actually put identifying pictures into an Excel spreadsheet. If anybody wants any more
Yeah,
information
I'm
about
the
it.
one who made the comment. I'm Karen,
Oh, hi.
and yeah, you can put detailed images with FileMaker Pro. The problem is the thumbnail's very tiny, so
Yeah,
I just think it's easier to export if you're dealing with maps. So
it probably is, Karen. It's I'm just saying that in Excel you can store an image which you can then expand, but that was all. It was just a quick comment.
I'll say that
But
when I've received Excel files that do have the images, it's only helpful for identifying the very basic details of the map. So for instance, is it, this edition or that edition, but if I need to see condition, those thumbnail images aren't high quality enough in order to really determine whether or not I can accept a consignment. So typically we would prefer, and then it also makes it difficult. You can't sort. I think that you can't sort the fields with the images in the file. I don't think, maybe you can, but anyway, we typically ask that people send us images separately. And somebody I see just asked a question of how high quality. We typically like to see images that are at least 0.5 MB, ideally 1 MB, so that we can see it clearly enough. And we recommend that people use a file transfer service, such as there are a lot of online file transfer services that are free. They don't cost anything. The one that we typically use is called WeTransfer.com, and you don't even have to have an account. So it's a wonderful way to be able to send many large files at one time. So that's what we typically recommend, is send us images that are at least 0.5 MB or 1 MB in size. Send them via WeTransfer, and then we can easily download them and view all of them to determine if the items can be accepted on consignment.
I'm sure that other collectors do the same thing. And it took me a while to figure this out. But when you buy a map from a dealer, you can ask the dealer for a copy of a high-res image. And most dealers for important or at least reasonably priced maps will have a high resolution image, and they'll be glad, if you've bought the map, they'll be glad to send it to you. Saves you the trouble of trying to have something scanned or photographed.
Okay, there are two related questions here, and you may have almost answered them. Tom Touchton, isn't another aspect of getting organized the providing of photographs of the items?
Hi, Tom, you're right as usual.
I'm sorry?
I said, hi, Tom, you're right as usual.
Okay. Okay, and the question about high quality, I think you answered that, Elion. Let's see, Karen has another comment. My collection is 90% macro images of rare maps in manuscript libraries that I photographed myself, 2K plus, many not seen before, but that are overwhelming in numbers of to fully catalog. So I see that's more of a comment. Okay, Vladimir Valerio from Italy was asking a question, PJ, when you were talking about some volumes, and he just said the volume, please.
He wanted me to turn up the volume on my speaker. I hope people can hear me now.
Okay, okay. Sorry about that. I thought he was talking about one of your books. Okay, let's see. Pat Crawley. A dealer will have to reduce his payment to us to ensure his own business profits. So I guess that's more of a comment. JC, a question for Elion. Describe the various types of auctions. I have always appreciated Old World's paradigm, but other auction houses have rapid fire sales with little time for potential buyers to think.
I think JC is talking about how some auctions operate more on a timed auction basis. So it's the item will close at a specific time, such as on eBay. And in those auctions, someone can go in at the very last millisecond and get in a bid, and then everyone else is kind of locked out of bidding once it closes. Other auction houses, such as ours, we have a 10-minute rule, so it allows the bidding to continue more like a live floor auction would, where the auctioneer can then continue to accept bids if there's active bidding going on. So different auctions that are online will operate in different ways. So from a bidder's perspective, it's important to know what type of auction you're bidding and how they operate.
A question from Nick Canas, and I think he typed this question before you discussed this, but just to repeat, do auction houses charge the seller for the items that don't sell?
I know that our auction house does. We consider it kind of a listing fee, and it's usually a low fee to account for all of the time and effort that went into cataloging, scanning, photography, marketing, and everything, so that if an item doesn't sell and we have to return it to the consignor, there is a small fee associated with that. I think I assume that a lot of other auction houses do the same. I can't speak. I don't know exactly what they do, but that often is the case. And that's why, again, we will try to relist an item that doesn't sell in a second auction to hopefully get it to sell, so that consignors aren't faced with that kind of return fee or listing fee.
Yeah, Elion, this is Nick. By the way, it's Canas, not Canas.
I'm sorry.
In terms of the fee, is that on items where there's no bidding or no interest, or does that reflect in it seems to me that if you have a few items and you just don't sell them because the bidding's not high enough, that's one thing, but if no one bids, it's another thing.
So again, it would depend on the auction house. So, but I can speak to ours. In our auction house, we have a period after the auction ends. It's called our post-auction sale. And so items that don't meet the reserve get shifted into the post-auction sale. And at that point, the consignors are able to negotiate the prices with any bidders. And so let's say the reserve was $500 and the bidding only got to $300, then the consignor could say, well, I won't accept 300, but I'll let it go for for 450 or for 400. So they can kind of negotiate to ensure that we're finding a match between the buyers and the sellers. So we try to do that. And so, consignors then have to make a decision. Is it better to forego that and at least sell it, forego some of the money and still guarantee a sale, or just have the item returned and have to pay a return fee? Again, Other auction houses may not have that option. So that's something that definitely, considering and consigning, you should find out what their process is after the auction.
Yeah, thank you.
A question from Greg Walter. Aside from the very valuable maps and manuscripts in general, has the market demand decreased in the last year?
I don't think that the market has decreased. It's decreased slightly since COVID. So COVID for us was, kind of for 2 to 3 years during COVID. Those were some of our highest sales within the last 10 years. So it's declined slightly since COVID, but not significantly. There's still a lot of demand, especially for the more unique and the higher value items. I don't know how Laura has seen the market, if she's seen any change.
Well, we have a unique situation where we have a giant store in the middle of Manhattan, so we're really lucky because a lot of my colleagues are virtual only. So they're relying on it's a different model. So we have people that are coming into the store and having a primary experience buying something for the first time. So it might not be big money, but it is definitely money, and it has to do with just people hungry for vital experiences. So it's hard to say. I can't judge the market because there's so many variables per day. Is that helpful?
Okay, Elton Kerr must have missed the introduction. He said, what auction house does Elion work for? Old World Auctions. So do you want to say any more, Elion?
No, I mean, you can find us on the internet. If you search for Old World Auctions, you'll find us.
I see we're getting close to 8 o'clock, but I still have more comments here. Patrick Crowley says, why does the date of my purchase matter?
Relevant.
It matters just because of the timing, the change in prices over time. So if you bought something in 1950 or 2000 or 2018, it's likely going to have a very different, it'll be a different price relative to what it is today. So it can give people a sense of whether that price will have increased or decreased over time.
Can I ask a question related to this? I'm sorry to interrupt, but some items like ancient coins and antiquities, there are cultural property laws, and items have to have been purchased before a certain time period in order for them to be legally sold. Is there anything like that in the world of maps, or does anybody anticipate that would ever be an issue?
I don't think so. I've never heard of that.
No, it's a free-for-all in the map world.
Well, you can hypothesize about a map that was so rare and valuable that it would run afoul of some of those laws, but that would be very uncommon.
Karen Pinto, what to do about the collections of major scholars, sadly near their end? I am facing this for a senior colleague in Germany who is the top scholar in medieval astrolabes and Qibla maps. I am trying to figure out how to help him from my location far away in the Mountain West.
Well, part of the problem, part of the question is what is the collection? Is it if it's a collection of medieval astrolabes and maps, that's probably extraordinarily valuable, and you would think about.
Yeah, and the thing is, he's reaching the end. His wife is very sick. He's reaching the end. We've been in touch, and I just it's come to the surface recently. Actually, I should have been more in touch, and I'm just trying to figure out what I can do to help him. because he has an amazing collection. I mean, I think one of the issues is, I say this as a scholar, right? We scholars are usually too poor, but he's got some astrolabes. But most of our collection is in images, right? That's where we have, but as Laura was saying, you don't have much of a purchase price. But I mean, some of this is not so much about purchase price as it is about housing a collection, right? That shouldn't just disappear.
Yeah, it sounds
Especially if
like
a
that
major
might be-
researcher. I mean, you can search his work if you want. Just if you put David King in academia, you will see his work is amazing. And I'm at a loss to. It's just emerged. I should have stayed in touch and more actively trying to figure out what was going on with his collection, but so I don't know. I mean, I've been trying to think about it. I've been thinking about, do I contact universities there and see if maybe there's some universities who might want to acquire his collection, or do I try to reach a European dealer?
Well, one of the things we didn't mention is that sadly, there's no such thing as cumulative value. Like because he was, say, for example, he was a genius scholar, very smart, and he organized all this material. There's not more value in the material because it's been grouped by him as a curator, collector, scholar. Each item has its own value. It doesn't matter about the curatorial aspect of it. And I think that shocks a lot of people, because it's you think he had the genius to put this together, but they're just objects in the end. And then if they're in Germany, it's hard to, I can't think of an auction house up ahead for Germany. Elion, can you?
What did you say?
The only auction house that I could think of is Reisensohn, but I don't know if they would do astrolabes, but they might. I know they do a lot of cartographic items, so that could be an option. Germany.
A European dealer who does do astrolabes and those kinds of things is Daniel Crouch.
Okay.
He's in London. If it depends here whether money is an object or not. Money were not an object. From what you're describing, it would seem to me that the collection, that there ought to be an institution that would be interested in having the whole collection. But
that's what I'm thinking too.
Yeah, but it all depends on whether the money is important. If the money's not important, there's a lot to be said for keeping it together.
I don't think the money is important. I mean, he's at the end. So I think as a scholar, I see it as the saving of this material for future scholars, right? I might actually try to contact the Library of Congress and see if they would be interested in acquiring his collection.
There's a museum on the pier out in Chicago. I'm blanking on it. It's planetarium, and they have a very large astrolabe collection. I just went there last year because of an instrument that I have. It's probably the oldest. Well, whatever. But they have a large collection.
Oh, you think you might have the oldest one, Cass?
That's the Adler Planetarium.
The Adler, yes, the Adler, right. They might be a good person to contact. I have an old quadrant, 16 dated 1650, but it was found in Albany, so it may be one of the oldest intact scientific instruments. But check with the Adler.
I'm on the board of the Adler Planetarium, and I guarantee you they would be interested in those astrolabes. They have huge.
Can I put my email address? Can I put my email address in? I don't know who's speaking right now.
This is Don Santusky.
Okay, hi Don. Can I give you my email address and then we could be in touch maybe? But it's sort of just recently come up actually, and because I was working with some of his material and I was trying to get some high-res images from him, and then I got to understand that he's sadly near the end.
Sure.
So
Go ahead.
MIT also has.
Now, mind you, his material is all
maybe-
Arabic, right? So
Yeah,
it's,
maybe
it's
Karen.
the
Karen, if
astrolabe
you
would be
can-
actually earlier than the 15th century. 15th,
So
16th
Karen, maybe
century,
if
yeah.
you can add that into the chat and then he can get your email address and then take this off.
I just added
Okay,
it. Yeah, thank you.
perfect.
And any other suggestions that anybody has, I would I'm just sort of, it just sort of came up suddenly. So
Well,
MIT has a museum, and I've talked to the curator, and she might be interested. She
Yeah.
actually
Okay.
worked for the curator for
the problem is, if you don't mind my saying this, Laura, I know you want to answer some other questions, but the problem is someone actually has to go get this from him.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? It's not like it's just he's not well enough to do it. That's the problem.
Just recently, the Harvard historian Owen Gingerich, who passed away a few months ago, they put his collection of books and such. Some of the material that he had sold for 5 and 6 figures, but he was world famous, and it was on the Christie, I believe, Christie's.
Yeah, David King is world famous too.
Yeah.
It's a question of how to, how to get the collection. So anyway, I was just, since you had this session, I thought I would ask. I know it's difficult, and I understand what Laura is saying, that there's this division between collection and scholarship. So anyway, yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
if we could move on, I think we need to probably close the meeting, but, and there are a couple more comments that I'm not going to get to, but the one I want to mention is from Andrew Adamson, who is the new editor of the Portalan. He says, it's not often that I get to address 90-ish people in one sitting, so I'd like to take the opportunity to invite those who have a story to tell about a map or maps that they have an interest in to contact me directly. We were always looking for articles we may include in the Portalan. Happy to help develop publishable articles. editor@wmsdc.org. So, and I guess there's another question. Do we ever make the questions that are in the chat available as part of the recording? John, Doctor?
Well, I will say, I know that we haven't in the past, but we can download the information from the Zoom account and make it available to people who request it. So as the webmaster, I'm at webmaster@wmsdc.org. So I will download it from Zoom. And if anybody wants record of the chat, please reach out to me and I will send it to you.
Okay.
I just wrote a message. They can contact me also if they want it at washmap@gmail.com.
Yeah. Elaine, I just sent you a request to get put back on the mailing list, Old World. I haven't purchased in a number of years, but I used to get your little mailer all the time, and all of a sudden it stopped, I guess because I wasn't buying anymore. But I'd like to get put back on your mailing list. So I sent you a chat, so you might want to look and see. It's a
Okay.
from me to you.
All right.
Yeah.
Ron, there is this one question that that John Doctor asked that I think a lot of collectors have, which is, what about selling cartographic reference works? Because a lot of us have a lot of reference works. Suggestions? Eliane, do they sell on Old World auctions?
Yes, we sell a lot of reference books in our auctions. They actually sell very well. I would say the paperbacks typically no, and it's more the books that are specialized cartobibliographies that sell the best. So mapping of a specific region, such as North America or Africa or China, those sell very well. And some of the generalist map books on just kind of general map collecting and the general history of cartography, we will sell some of those. They don't sell for a lot, but we do sell them, and there's interest because a lot of people just want some general basic information on maps and map collecting. So yes, there certainly is a market. I will say for people who have runs of journals. We don't accept journals that are currently in publication or can be accessed digitally, such as the Portalon or IMCOS Journal or others of that nature, but we do accept full runs of things like the Map Collector or Map Forum. I think there are a couple of others. So those types, or books like the History of Cartography, we accept those. Those sell well. So there are certainly a lot of reference books and even facsimile atlases that will sell because people like to use those for reference purposes.
Okay. Any other immediate questions that need to be asked? I'm sure.
Can I ask another question?
Okay, go
So
ahead.
if one is an expert at appraising manuscripts of certain kinds, how does one put one's name out there? Collectors have reached out to me, but I wonder, is there a general, was it just per collector? I know this, you guys are all, you're responding as collectors. Laura, you're a collector, right?
I'm a dealer, but do you mean how do you
Oh,
find?
I mean a dealer. Sorry, I mean dealers, right? I meant
How do
dealers,
you
not
find
collectors.
appraiser?
Yeah.
How do you,
Well, you know, when you receive things that you need evaluated, how does that work?
Well, it's very expensive to get an appraisal. I tell people not to do it unless they really have to.
Mhm.
So in the case for if you're donating the object, you have to get an appraisal, but otherwise
Mhm.
it's too expensive, and it's not necessarily worth it to have someone come up with value for you. It's only if you're giving it away or if a family member needs to know.
Mm.
Otherwise, you don't really need to know the value. You could just try to consign it at auction or something like that.
Well, I've done appraising. I'm just trying to figure out how you get your name out there as someone who can do appraising.
Oh, you can become a member of
See.
the Appraisers Association.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Appraisers Association. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, I'd like to thank all three of our speakers. I must say Elion was a late addition, so I wasn't quite prepared. But for Laura and PJ, I have gotten them my usual gift from a company called Territory. And these are note cards with an image of Manhattan on them. So Elion, I'll get you one for Richmond.
You don't need to do that. Thank you.
That is so sweet. Thank you so much.
Okay, this has been a good evening, and I'm sure there's a lot more discussion that could go on, but to be respectful of all the people who are involved, again, thank you. And I'm sure if you contact each one of the speakers with more particular questions, they can respond to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Ron. Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Please come April 24th. Bye.
Oh,
All right.
Thanks to all. That was wonderful.